The night Lady Alara Whitcomb was cast into the storm, she carried two secrets, one growing inside her womb and one buried deep in her heart, that she would never beg. Rain hammered the cobblestones as Duke Lucien Varric's words cut sharper than any blade. "You have failed me. Leave." No trial, no mercy, just exile. But while he believed he was discarding a barren wife, the truth would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about power, legacy, and the woman he never bothered to understand. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The rain came down in sheets that night, brutal and unforgiving, the kind that turned dirt roads into rivers and made even the bravest men think twice about stepping outside. But Lady Alara Whitcomb wasn't given a choice. She stood in the grand hall of Varric Manor, water pooling at her feet from the cloak she'd been handed moments before. Thin, threadbare, nothing like the velvet-lined capes she used to wear. The servants who'd dressed her that morning wouldn't meet her eyes now. They knew what was coming. Everyone did. Duke Lucien Varric sat in his high-backed chair near the fireplace, one leg crossed over the other, his face carved from stone. He didn't look at her. He hadn't looked at her properly in months. "You understand why this is necessary," he said, his voice flat, clinical. Alara didn't answer right away. She was still processing the cold efficiency of it all. The way his steward had appeared at her chambers just after supper, the way her belongings had already been packed into a single trunk, the way the carriage waiting outside wasn't even one of the good ones. "I understand," she said quietly, "that you've made your decision. It's not personal." Lucien finally glanced at her, and there was nothing in his eyes. No anger, no regret, just absence. 3 years, Alara. 3 years and no heir. The family council has been patient, but patience has limits. She wanted to laugh. Patience. As if they'd given her anything but scrutiny and whispers and cold, appraising stares every time she entered a room. "I see," she said. "You'll be provided a residence in the northern countryside," he continued, as if reading from a prepared statement. "Modest, but sufficient. A small allowance will be arranged. You'll want for nothing essential." Nothing essential. The words landed like stones in her chest. "How generous," she murmured. His jaw tightened just slightly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making anything hard, Lucien." She kept her voice steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "You've decided I'm useless to you. I accept that." "It's not about useless. Then what is it about?" She took a step forward, and for the first time in weeks, he actually looked at her, really looked. "Say it plainly. What am I, if not a failure in your eyes?" He stood, and the firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, harder. "You were meant to secure the line. That was the arrangement. Your father and I were clear about expectations." "My father sold me to you like livestock," Alara said, and her voice didn't shake. "And you accepted the transaction. So let's not pretend this was ever about anything other than bloodlines and titles." Lucien's expression darkened. "You knew what this was." "I did." She pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders. "And now you know what I am. A woman who won't beg to stay where she's not wanted." Something flickered across his face then. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. He'd expected tears, probably, pleading, the kind of scene that would let him feel like the reasonable one. She wouldn't give him that. "The carriage is waiting," he said after a long pause. "Then I won't keep you any longer." She turned toward the door, every muscle in her body screaming to run, to collapse, to do anything other than walk calmly toward her own exile. But she forced herself to move with grace, the same grace she'd been taught since girlhood, the kind that was supposed to make her worthy of a duke's attention. It hadn't been enough. The servants parted as she passed, their faces carefully blank. One of the younger maids, a girl named Bess, had tears streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. Outside, the storm raged. The carriage driver, an older man with a face weathered by decades of service, helped her inside without a word. The interior smelled of mildew and old leather. No cushions, no warmth. As the carriage lurched forward, Alara pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the barely there swell beneath her dress. She'd known for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of waking up nauseous, of hiding the signs, of planning what she would say when the time was right. She'd wanted to be sure, wanted to have the physician confirm it, wanted to choose the perfect moment to tell Lucien that everything he thought was wrong. But she'd waited too long. And now, sitting in this rattling carriage, heading toward some unknown exile, she made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't tell him. Not now. Maybe not ever. Let him think he'd cast out a barren wife. Let him live with that choice. She would survive on her own terms. The journey north took 3 days. 3 days of rain-soaked roads and stops at increasingly shabby inns where the innkeepers looked at her with poorly concealed pity. The driver, whose name she learned was Thomas, was kind in his silence. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't offer false comfort. He simply drove and occasionally made sure she had something to eat. "Not much farther now, my lady," he said on the morning of the 4th day, as gray light filtered through the trees. Elora looked out the window. The landscape had changed dramatically since leaving Varick Manor. Gone were the manicured gardens and stone-paved drives. Here, the land was wild. Dense forests giving way to rolling hills covered in tall grass that bent and swayed in the wind. It was beautiful, in a lonely sort of way. The cottage appeared around midday, sitting at the edge of a small clearing like something out of a cautionary tale. It was larger than she'd expected. 2 stories, stone foundation, a thatched roof that had seen better days but wasn't actively leaking. Smoke curled from the chimney. "Someone's been keeping it ready for you," Thomas said, pulling the carriage to a stop. Before Elora could respond, the front door opened and a woman emerged, middle-aged, sturdy-looking, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and she looked at Elora with an expression that was neither warm nor cold. Just assessing. "Lady Whitcomb," the woman said, offering a slight bow. "I'm Mrs. Petra Givens. I manage the house and the grounds. His Grace arranged for me to stay on and assist you." Of course he did. Couldn't have her completely alone. That might look bad. "Thank you," Elora said, accepting Thomas's hand as she stepped down from the carriage. Her legs were stiff from days of travel, and she stumbled slightly. Mrs. Givens was there in an instant, steadying her with a firm grip. "Careful now, you've had a long journey." Up close, the woman's eyes were sharp, intelligent. She was taking in everything, the pallor of Elora's skin, the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself with fragile dignity. "I'll show you inside," Mrs. Givens said. "Thomas, bring the trunk around back. I'll have it sorted later." The interior of the cottage was sparse but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a wooden table, 2 chairs. A narrow staircase leading up to what Elora assumed were the bedrooms. Everything was functional, nothing more. "There's a root cellar stocked with preserves," Mrs. Givens explained, moving through the space with practiced efficiency. "Firewood's already laid in for the winter. The well's out back, water's clean. Nearest village is about 3 miles east if you need supplies." "And how often will someone come from the manor?" Elora asked. Mrs. Givens paused, her back to Elora. "His Grace didn't specify regular visits. The allowance will be delivered quarterly." Quarterly, 4 times a year. That was all the contact she'd have with her former life. "I see. My lady," Mrs. Givens turned, and something in her expression had softened slightly. "I don't know what happened at the manor, and it's not my place to ask. But you should know. I'm here because I choose to be, not because I was ordered. If you need help, I'll give it. If you want to be left alone, I'll respect that too." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to Elora in months. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it. The first week was the hardest. Elora woke each morning in the small bedroom upstairs, staring at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, trying to remember how to breathe. Everything felt wrong. The silence, the isolation, the crushing weight of what had happened. She'd been raised to be a duchess, taught to manage households, host gatherings, navigate the intricate politics of noble society. None of that mattered here. Here, she was just alone. Mrs. Givens kept a respectful distance, appearing only to bring meals or check that Elora had everything she needed. The woman was true to her word. She didn't pry, didn't hover. But Elora caught her watching sometimes, a thoughtful expression on her weathered face. On the 8th day, Elora finally left the cottage. She told herself it was just to walk the grounds, to understand the boundaries of this new prison. But truthfully, she couldn't stand another hour staring at those walls. The land around the cottage was wilder than anything she'd known. Overgrown gardens that might have once been cultivated, a small orchard thick with unpruned apple trees, fields of tall grass that whispered secrets to the wind. In the distance, she could see the edge of a forest, dark and dense. She walked until her feet ached, until the cottage was just a small shape behind her. And then she kept walking. Eventually, she came to a stream, narrow but fast-moving, the water so clear she could see smooth stones on the bottom. She knelt beside it, cupping the cold water in her hands and splashing it on her face. That's when she felt it. A flutter. So faint she almost missed it, like butterfly wings against the inside of her ribs. Her hand flew to her stomach, pressing gently. There, again. Stronger this time. The baby. Their baby. Alara's breath caught, and for the first time since leaving Varick Manor, she let herself cry. Not quiet, dignified tears. Real crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken and desperately trying to heal. She cried for the girl she'd been, who'd believed that doing everything right would be enough. She cried for the marriage that had never been more than a contract. She cried for the loneliness, the fear, the impossible situation she now found herself in. And when the tears finally stopped, something else settled in their place. Determination. She was carrying Lucien's child, the heir he'd wanted so desperately, the heir he'd thrown away without ever knowing it existed. She could go back, could send word, could force him to take her back, could reclaim her position. But the thought made her feel sick. She didn't want to return to Varick Manor as some forgiven failure. Didn't want to spend the rest of her life being the woman who'd been cast out and then came crawling back. No. If she was going to survive this, she'd do it on her own terms. She'd build something here, something real. And maybe, just maybe, she'd prove that she was worth more than a bloodline. The village of Grey Hollow sat 3 miles east of the cottage, just as Mrs. Givens had said. It wasn't much, a cluster of timber and thatch buildings arranged around a muddy central square, a small church with a crooked steeple, a tavern that looked like it had been standing since before anyone could remember. But it was alive in a way Varick Manor had never been, full of noise and movement and the messy, complicated business of actual living. Alara arrived on foot one afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after her exile began. She'd borrowed one of Mrs. Givens's simpler dresses, had pinned her hair back in a practical bun, had tried to look like she belonged. She didn't fool anyone. The villagers stared as she passed, their conversations dropping to whispers. She heard the word Duchess more than once, spoken with a mix of curiosity and wariness. The general store was a cramped space that smelled of dried herbs and sawdust. An elderly man stood behind the counter, eyeing her with obvious suspicion. "Can I help you, my lady?" he asked, the title sounding almost mocking in his rough accent. "I need supplies," Alara said, keeping her voice level. "Flour, salt, candles, and thread, if you have it." He named a price that was probably twice what he'd charge anyone else. She paid without argument, too tired to fight. As she was leaving, a woman's voice called out behind her. "Wait!" Alara turned. The woman was younger than Mrs. Givens, but older than Alara, maybe 40, with sun-weathered skin and intelligent eyes. She wore a healer's satchel across her body, herbs poking out the top. "You're the one staying at the old Herrick cottage," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "Mara Brennan," the woman said, offering her hand. "Village healer, midwife too, when needed." Alara hesitated only a moment before shaking it. "Alara Whitcomb." "I know who you are." Mara's smile was wry. "Everyone knows who you are. Question is, what are you doing here?" "Living," Alara said simply. Mara studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if she'd found the answer she was looking for. "You look pale. When's the last time you ate something green?" The directness of it caught Alara off guard. I don't know. Come with me." "I have to get back. 5 minutes," Mara said firmly. "I won't let a lady waste away on my watch, even if she's been thrown out by some fool duke." Despite everything, Alara felt a smile tug at her lips. 5 minutes. Mara's cottage was smaller than Alara's, but infinitely more lived in. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, books were stacked in precarious towers, and there were jars and bottles everywhere, filled with tinctures and salves, and things Alara couldn't begin to identify. Sit, Mara ordered, pointing to a chair. Alara sat. Mara rummaged through her shelves, eventually producing a small cloth bag. Nettle tea. Drink it twice a day. It'll help with the exhaustion and the nausea. Alara's blood went cold. How did you— I'm a healer, Mara said matter-of-factly. It's my job to notice things. The pallor, the way you're holding yourself, the fact that you're buying thread, but your hands look like they've never done needlework in your life. She paused. How far along? 3 months, Alara whispered. Give or take. Mara nodded. Does he know? No. The word came out harder than Alara intended. And he won't. Not for me. Something shifted in Mara's expression. Respect, maybe. Or understanding. That's your choice to make. But if you're planning to do this alone, you'll need help. Pregnancy isn't something you can just power through. I have Mrs. Givens. Mrs. Givens is a housekeeper, not a healer. Mara sat down across from her. Look, I don't know what happened between you and the Duke, and I don't need to. But I know what it's like to be cast aside by people who think they're better than you, so here's what I'm offering. I'll check on you once a week. Make sure you and the baby are healthy. Teach you what you need to know. I can't pay you much, Alara said quietly. I don't want your money. Mara leaned back in her chair. But if you're serious about surviving out here, you'll need to learn to be useful. Can you read? Of course. Good. Then you can help me catalog my herbs and update my records. Most of the people around here can't read worth a damn, so I end up doing everything myself. She paused. Fair trade? It was more than fair. It was a lifeline. Yes, Alara said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mara said with a slight smile. Winter's coming, and it's brutal out here. You'll earn every bit of that gratitude. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm Alara had never known before, one dictated by necessity rather than social obligation. She woke with the sun, helped Mrs. Givens with the household tasks she'd never had to do herself, then walked to the village 3 times a week to work with Mara. The healer was a demanding teacher, expecting Alara to remember not just the names of herbs but their properties, their interactions, the subtle differences between healing and harming doses. Pay attention, Mara would snap when Alara's focus wandered. Confuse foxglove with comfrey and you'll kill someone. But beneath the gruffness, there was genuine care. Mara checked on Alara's health with clinical precision, noting every change, every symptom, adjusting her recommendations accordingly. You're stronger than you look, Mara observed one afternoon, watching Alara grind dried valerian root with a mortar and pestle. Most ladies of quality would have fallen apart by now. I'm not most ladies, Alara said quietly. No, Mara agreed. You're not. Word spread through Grey Hollow that the disgraced Duchess was working with the healer. Some of the villagers warmed to her, slowly, cautiously, but it was something. Others remained suspicious, convinced she was either a spy or simply slumming until her duke took her back. Alara ignored the whispers. She had more important things to focus on. Her body was changing in ways she hadn't expected. The nausea that had plagued her early on faded, replaced by a constant, bone-deep exhaustion. Her dresses were getting tighter around the middle, and there were moments, quiet, private moments, when she felt the baby move, and the entire world seemed to stop. It's a boy, Mrs. Givens announced one evening, watching Alara from across the dinner table. You can't possibly know that, Alara said. I can. Had 6 of my own. I know the signs. Mrs. Givens smiled faintly. He'll be strong, stubborn too, if he takes after his mother. The words hit Alara harder than they should have. His mother, not a duchess, not a failure, just a mother. I hope he does, she said softly. Listen, winter arrived with brutal efficiency. The first snow came in late October, turning the world into something quiet and white and impossibly cold. Alara had never experienced winter like this, not in the manor with its massive fireplaces and servants who kept everything warm and comfortable. Here, staying warm was a matter of survival. Mrs. Givens proved invaluable, teaching Alara how to bank the fires properly, how to layer clothing to retain heat, how to ration the firewood so it would last until spring. The older woman worked tirelessly, never complaining, never judging. "You're taking to this better than I expected," Mrs. Givens said one evening, watching Ilara carefully mend a tear in one of her cloaks. "I didn't have much choice," Ilara replied. "We always have choices. You could have crumbled. Could have sent word to the Duke, begged him to take you back. Instead, you're learning to survive." Mrs. Givens paused. "That takes courage." Ilara looked up from her stitching. "Or stubbornness." "Same thing, most days." The trips to Grey Hollow became harder as the snow deepened, but Ilara refused to stop. Mara needed her help, and more than that, she needed the purpose it gave her, needed to feel useful. It was on one of these trips, battling through ankle-deep snow, that she encountered the first real crisis. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, came running up to her, his face streaked with tears and panic. "Please," he gasped. "My ma, she's sick, real sick. The healer's off tending to Mrs. Vickers, and we don't know what to do." Ilara's first instinct was to find someone else. She wasn't a healer, not really. She was just an assistant, someone who cataloged herbs and read from dusty books. But the boy was looking at her with such desperate hope, and there was no one else. "Show me," she said. The boy's cottage was small and drafty, and his mother lay on a cot near the fire, shivering violently despite being buried under every blanket the family owned. Her skin was flushed with fever, her breathing labored. Ilara knelt beside her, forcing herself to remember everything Mara had taught her. Check the symptoms, assess the severity. Don't panic. "How long has she been like this?" she asked the boy's father, a weathered man who looked terrified. "Since yesterday morning. Thought it was just a chill at first, but..." He gestured helplessly at his wife. Ilara pressed the back of her hand to the woman's forehead. Burning hot. She pulled back the blankets, checking for rashes, swelling, anything that might indicate what was wrong. There, on the woman's neck, swollen glands, and when she asked the woman to open her mouth, her throat was angry and red. "Quinsy," Ilara said, recognizing it from one of Mara's lessons. "Throat infection. Dangerous if left untreated." "Can you help her?" the father asked, his voice breaking. Ilara's mind raced. Mara kept certain herbs on hand for emergencies. Yarrow for fever, sage for infection, honey to soothe the throat. "I need to get supplies from the healer's cottage," she said, standing. "Keep her warm and try to get her to drink water, small sips. I'll be back as soon as I can." She ran through the snow, her pregnant belly making her awkward and slow, but she didn't stop. Mara had given her a key to the cottage for emergencies, and this qualified. Inside, she grabbed what she needed, measuring carefully, double-checking everything. Mara's voice echoed in her head. "Too much sage oil, and you'll make it worse. Not enough, and it won't help at all." Back at the boy's cottage, she mixed the herbs into a tea, helping the woman drink it in careful sips. Then she made a poultice for the throat, explaining to the father how to reapply it every few hours. "This should bring the fever down," she said. "But if it gets worse, you need to send for Mara immediately. Do you understand?" The man nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, my lady. Thank you." Ilara stayed until the woman's breathing eased, until the violent shivering stopped, until she was sure the crisis had passed. When she finally stumbled back to her own cottage hours later, exhausted and covered in snow, Mrs. Givens was waiting with hot soup and a knowing look. "Heard you saved Nell Braddock's life," the older woman said. "I just did what Mara taught me." "Still counts." Mrs. Givens ladled soup into a bowl. "Word will spread. You know that, right? By tomorrow, the whole village will know the Duchess can heal." Ilara hadn't thought about that. She'd just acted. "Is that bad?" she asked. "Depends," Mrs. Givens said. "How do you feel about becoming indispensable?" Mrs. Givens was right. By the next week, people started appearing at the cottage. Quietly at first. A farmer with an infected cut. A woman whose child had been coughing for days. An elderly man whose joints ached so badly he could barely walk. Ilara treated them all, using what Mara had taught her, consulting the books when she wasn't sure. She never charged them. She had the Duke's allowance, meager as it was, and these people had nothing, but they brought payment anyway. Eggs from someone's chickens, fresh bread, a beautifully carved wooden bowl, a jar of honey. Gifts, they said, just tokens of appreciation. Ilara accepted them with gratitude, realizing slowly what was happening. She was becoming part of the community. Not as a duchess, as someone who had value beyond her bloodline. Mara found out, of course. She showed up at the cottage one afternoon, arms crossed, looking both amused and annoyed. "I leave you alone for 2 weeks and you start your own practice?" she said. "I'm sorry," Alara said quickly. "I know I should have asked." "I'm not angry." Mara's expression softened. "I'm impressed and grateful. I can't be everywhere at once, especially in winter, having someone else who knows what they're doing." She trailed off, then smiled. "You're not half bad at this, you know." Coming from Mara, it was high praise. "Thank you," Alara said. "Don't let it go to your head. You've still got a lot to learn." Mara glanced at Alara's belly, which was now unmistakably rounded. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but good, I think." "Good's not good enough. You're 5 months along now. You need to be resting more, not running around playing healer for every person in the valley." "I can't just stop." "I'm not saying stop. I'm saying be careful." Mara's voice was firm but kind. "That baby's depending on you. Don't forget that." Alara placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the now familiar flutters of movement. "I won't." December arrived with bitter cold and shorter days. Alara's world had contracted to the cottage, the village, the work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. She thought about Lucien less now. When she did, it was with a strange, detached curiosity, wondering if he ever thought about her, if he regretted what he'd done. Probably not. Men like Lucien didn't second-guess their decisions. They moved forward, confident in their righteousness. But sometimes, late at night, she wondered what he would say if he knew. If he could see her now, not broken and begging, but strong and purposeful. Would he be surprised? Would he care? She told herself it didn't matter. And then, on a gray afternoon with snow falling soft and steady, Mrs. Givens burst into the cottage, her face pale and tight with worry. "Riders," she said, "coming from the south. 3 of them. And they're not villagers." Alara's heart dropped. "From the manor?" "Most likely." For a moment, Alara considered hiding, running, but where would she go? And besides, she was done running. "All right," she said, standing. "Let them come." She walked outside, Mrs. Givens close behind her. The riders appeared through the snow, 3 men on horseback, all wearing the dark blue livery of House Varick. The lead rider dismounted, pulling off his hood. Alara recognized him immediately, Captain James Rennick, head of Lucien's personal guard. They'd spoken perhaps 3 times during her marriage, always in formal, uncomfortable exchanges. "Lady Whitcomb," he said, offering a stiff bow. "Captain Rennick." Alara kept her voice neutral. "What brings you here?" He looked uncomfortable, his gaze darting to Mrs. Givens and then back to Alara. "His Grace requests your presence at the manor." "Requests?" Alara raised an eyebrow. "Or demands?" "My lady." "I was cast out, Captain. Exiled. Those were your Duke's exact words. So forgive me if I'm confused about why I'm suddenly being summoned." Rennick shifted his weight. "There have been developments. His Grace feels it's important that you return." "What kind of developments?" "I wasn't told the details, my lady, only that the matter is urgent." Alara studied him, trying to read between the lines. Urgent. What could possibly be urgent enough to bring riders through winter snow to drag her back? Unless someone had told him about the baby. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, hidden beneath the thick wool of her cloak. If he knew, if he'd found out somehow, this wasn't a request. It was a retrieval. "I need time to consider," she said. His Grace was quite clear that— "I don't care what His Grace was clear about," Alara interrupted, her voice sharp. "I'm not chattel to be summoned and dismissed at his whim. If he wants me to return, he can have the decency to ask properly, in writing." Rennick looked genuinely shocked. He'd probably expected her to cave immediately, grateful for the chance to go back. I'll convey your response to His Grace." "You do that." She turned and walked back into the cottage, leaving the captain standing in the snow. Mrs. Givens followed her inside, closing the door firmly behind them. "That was risky," the older woman said quietly. "I know. If he knows about the baby." "He can't force me to go back," Alara said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "I'm not his wife anymore. He made that abundantly clear." "You're carrying his heir. That changes things." Alara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I know. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind howl outside. Finally, Mrs. Givens spoke. What are you going to do? Alara looked down at her hands, rough now from work, no longer the soft, useless hands of a lady. I'm going to finish what I started, she said. I'm going to survive. The letter arrived 4 days later, delivered by a lone rider who looked half frozen and wholly miserable. Alara took it from him without a word, broke the wax seal, Lucien's personal mark, the Varick Raven, and read it standing in the doorway while snow dusted her shoulders. Lady Whitcomb, your refusal to return has been noted. However, circumstances have arisen that require your immediate presence at the manor. This is not a matter of reconciliation, but of legal necessity. The family council has raised questions regarding the dissolution of our marriage contract that demand your testimony. I expect you within the fortnight. Duke Lucien Varick. Alara read it twice, then crumpled it in her fist. Legal necessity. Not an apology, not even a hint of regret. Just another order, wrapped in formal language and delivered like she was some minor functionary he could summon at will. My lady? The rider was still standing there, shivering. Is there a response? She thought about it. Thought about writing back something cutting, something that would make Lucien understand exactly what she thought of his demands. Instead, she said, Tell His Grace I'm occupied with matters of actual importance. He'll have to manage his legal necessities without me. The rider's eyes went wide. But my lady, that's the message. Deliver it or don't. I don't particularly care. She stepped back and shut the door in his face. Mrs. Givens was waiting in the main room, arms crossed. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not playing anything, Alara said, tossing the crumpled letter into the fire. I meant what I said to Captain Rennick. I'm done being summoned like a dog. And if he decides to come here himself? Alara paused, one hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby, her son, if Mrs. Givens was right, kicked hard, as if offering his own opinion on the matter. Then he'll see exactly what he threw away, she said quietly. The truth was she didn't know what Lucien would do. The man she'd been married to for 3 years had been cold, distant, controlled. He'd never raised his voice, never lost his temper, but he'd also never had anyone openly defy him. She was about to find out what happened when someone did. January came in bitter and brutal. The snow piled so high that the cottage windows were half buried, and getting to Grey Hollow became nearly impossible. Alara stayed close to home, working with the supplies Mara had given her, treating the handful of villagers brave enough to trek through the drifts. Her pregnancy was becoming impossible to hide now. 6 months along, and her belly was round and prominent beneath even her loosest dresses. The villagers who came to see her noticed, of course, but no one said anything. That was one advantage of being exiled nobility. People were too afraid of overstepping to ask uncomfortable questions. Mrs. Givens fretted constantly, insisting Alara rest more, work less, eat enough for 2. The older woman had softened considerably over the months, her stern exterior cracking to reveal genuine affection. You're too thin, Mrs. Givens announced one morning, ladling an extra portion of porridge into Alara's bowl. The baby's taking everything you've got. You need to keep your strength up. I'm fine, Alara protested, though truthfully she was exhausted most days. The work, the pregnancy, the constant low-level anxiety about what Lucien might do, it all pressed down on her like a physical weight. You're stubborn is what you are, Mrs. Givens sat down across from her. Just like my daughter was, worked herself half to death trying to prove she didn't need anyone's help. It was the first time Mrs. Givens had mentioned her own family. Alara looked up, curious. Where is she now? Your daughter? Mrs. Givens' expression went carefully blank. Dead. Childbed fever, 7 years ago. The baby, too. The words hit Alara like a blow. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Why would you? Mrs. Givens stood, busying herself with cleaning up. Point is, I've seen what happens when a woman tries to do everything alone. So when I tell you to rest, it's not because I think you're weak. It's because I don't want to bury another stubborn girl who didn't know when to ask for help. Alara's throat tightened. I'll rest more. I promise. Mrs. Givens nodded curtly and turned away, but not before Alara saw her wipe at her eyes. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon, sharp and insistent. Alara had been dozing by the fire, a book of herbal remedies open on her lap, when the sound jolted her awake. Mrs. Givens was in the village, trading some of their preserves for fresh meat, so Alara was alone. She pushed herself up, awkward now with the extra weight, and opened the door. A woman stood there, young and clearly terrified, clutching a bundle wrapped in blankets. "Please," the woman gasped. "You have to help. My baby, she's burning up and I don't know what to do, and Mara's gone to Westfield and—" "Slow down," Alara said, ushering her inside. "Show me." The woman pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny infant, maybe 3 months old, with flushed cheeks and glassy eyes. The baby was making weak, mewling sounds that set every instinct in Alara's body on high alert. She touched the baby's forehead, scorching hot. "How long has she had the fever?" Alara asked, already moving toward her supplies. "Since last night. I thought it would break, but it just keeps getting worse." The woman's voice cracked. "Please, I can't lose her. She's all I have." Alara's hands moved on their own, measuring out willow bark for the fever, preparing a cool compress, checking the baby's mouth and throat for signs of infection. Her mind cataloged symptoms, the rapid breathing, the way the infant's fontanelle seemed sunken, the dry lips, dehydration. That was the immediate danger. "She needs fluids," Alara said. "Are you still nursing?" "She won't latch. Hasn't eaten since yesterday." That was bad. Babies this young could deteriorate fast without food and water. Alara thought frantically, trying to remember everything Mara had taught her about infant care. There was a technique, something about using a clean cloth soaked in water or weak tea to drip liquid into the baby's mouth. "I need you to trust me," Alara said. "This is going to take time, and it's going to be difficult, but if we can get fluids into her and bring the fever down, she has a chance." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Anything, just please save her." They worked for hours. Alara showed the mother how to carefully drip chamomile tea, diluted and cooled, into the baby's mouth, just a few drops at a time. She changed the cool compresses every 15 minutes, monitoring the infant's temperature obsessively. She mixed a paste of herbs that Mara swore could help with inflammation and gently rubbed it on the baby's chest. It was delicate, exhausting work, made harder by Alara's own physical limitations. Her back ached from bending over, her hands cramped from the repetitive motions, and the baby inside her seemed to sense the tension, kicking and squirming restlessly. But slowly, agonizingly slowly, the infant's condition began to stabilize. The fever dropped a degree, then another. The baby managed to swallow a few drops of tea without choking. Her breathing evened out. By the time Mrs. Givens returned at dusk, the crisis had passed. The baby was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, and Alara was slumped in a chair, utterly spent. "What happened here?" Mrs. Givens demanded, taking in the scene. The young mother looked up, her face wet with grateful tears. "She saved my daughter's life." Mrs. Givens turned to Alara, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have been working in your condition." "I didn't have a choice," Alara said quietly. "There's always a choice." "Not this time." Alara met her eyes. "Would you have turned her away?" Mrs. Givens was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "No, I suppose I wouldn't have." Word spread faster than Alara could have imagined. Within days, it seemed like everyone in Grey Hollow and the surrounding farms knew that the Duchess had saved baby Cora Finn. And once that story was out, more people came. A man with a badly infected hand that had been bothering him for weeks. A woman whose elderly mother couldn't keep food down. A child with a persistent cough that wouldn't respond to anything the family had tried. Alara treated them all, working from the cottage when they came to her, occasionally making difficult trips to the village when someone couldn't travel. She was careful, methodical, always conscious of what she didn't know, and when to admit she needed Mara's expertise. Mara herself showed up one afternoon in late January, stomping snow off her boots and fixing Alara with a stern look. "You're making me redundant," she said. Alara's stomach dropped. "I never meant to—" "I'm joking." Mara's expression softened slightly. "Mostly. Look, you're doing good work. Better than I expected, honestly. But you need to be more careful. You're 7 months pregnant, for heaven's sake." "I know." "Do you?" Mara sat down, her healer's eyes scanning Alara with professional concern. Because from where I'm sitting, you look exhausted, underweight despite that belly, and about 2 steps from collapsing. You can't help anyone if you work yourself to death. I'm fine. Don't lie to a healer. Mara's voice was sharp. You're not fine. You're running on stubbornness and whatever's left of your pride. That'll carry you for a while, but not forever. Elara looked away, feeling the sting of truth in Mara's words. What am I supposed to do? Turn people away? No. You're supposed to accept help when it's offered. Mara pulled out a small leather journal and handed it to Elara. This is a copy of my most important remedies and techniques. Recipes, dosages, everything. I'm giving it to you because I trust you to use it responsibly. But I'm also giving it to you so you'll stop trying to remember everything and can focus on taking care of yourself. Elara took the journal, feeling the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but what it represented. Trust, partnership, respect. Thank you, she whispered. Thank me by resting more. Mara stood. And when that baby comes, you send for me immediately. I don't care if it's the middle of the night in a blizzard. You understand? I understand. Mara paused at the door. You know, when you first came here, I thought you'd last maybe a month before running back to your Duke. I'm glad I was wrong. After she left, Elara sat alone with the journal, carefully turning its pages. Each one was filled with Mara's cramped handwriting, detailing years of accumulated knowledge. It was a gift beyond price. She wondered what Lucian would think if he could see her now. Would he even recognize the woman she'd become? Did she even recognize herself? February brought a brief thaw, and with it, trouble. Elara was working in the cottage one afternoon, grinding herbs for a salve when she heard horses. Multiple horses. Her heart sank even before Mrs. Givens burst through the door. It's the Duke, she said, her face pale. He's here. Elara's hand stilled on the mortar. How many with him? Just 2 guards, but my lady... It's all right. Elara stood, smoothing down her dress. There was no hiding her condition now. The pregnancy was obvious, her belly round and prominent. Let him see. She walked outside, Mrs. Givens hovering protectively behind her. Lucien sat astride a massive black horse, looking every inch the powerful nobleman in his fine cloak and polished boots. But when he saw her, really saw her, his expression shattered. He dismounted in one smooth motion, staring at her like she was a ghost. You're pregnant, he said, and it wasn't a question. Observant, Elara replied, keeping her voice level despite the way her heart was hammering. How long? 7 months. She watched him do the math, saw the moment comprehension dawned. 7 months. Which meant she'd been pregnant when he cast her out. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was raw, stripped of its usual composure. When exactly should I have mentioned it? Elara asked coolly. Before or after you threw me out into the snow? Elara, No. She held up a hand. You don't get to Elara me. You made your decision. You decided I was useless, barren, a failure. So I let you believe it. Lucien looked like he'd been struck. You deliberately kept this from me? I kept my child safe from a man who'd already proven he couldn't be trusted. That's my heir you're carrying. This is my son, Elara said, her voice hard as stone. Mine, not yours, not the family council's, mine. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Lucien noticed, waving them back with a sharp gesture. When he looked at Elara again, something in his expression had changed. We need to talk, he said. Privately. We are talking. Elara, please. The please surprised her. Lucien didn't beg, didn't plead, but there it was, raw and desperate in his voice. Against her better judgment, she nodded toward the cottage. 5 minutes. Inside, with Mrs. Givens standing guard by the door, Lucien looked around the modest space with poorly concealed shock. This was nothing like the luxurious chambers she'd occupied at the manor. You've been living here? He asked. You picked it. Don't act surprised. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd never seen him make before. Lucien was always composed, always controlled. Seeing him rattled was deeply unsettling. I didn't know, he said finally, about the baby. I swear to you, if I'd known, you would have what? Kept me? Elara laughed bitterly. Like livestock that finally proved its worth? That's not. He stopped, took a breath. I made a mistake. You made several. I know. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw actual emotion in his eyes. I was angry, frustrated. The family council was pressuring me, questioning my judgment, suggesting that perhaps I'd made a poor match. And instead of defending you, defending us, I took the easy way out. The easy way out was destroying my life. I know! The words came out harsh, almost violent. I know what I did. I've spent the last 2 months trying to figure out how to fix it, and then Rennick came back and told me you'd refuse to return, and I realized... He stopped, struggling with something. I realized you might never come back, that I might have lost you permanently. You lost me the moment you cast me out, Alara said quietly. This, she gestured to her belly, doesn't change that, doesn't it? He took a step closer. Alara, that's my child, my son. I have a right. You have nothing. Her voice cracked like a whip. You gave up your rights when you threw me away. I don't care what the law says or what your family council thinks. This child is mine, and I will raise him as I see fit. Here? Lucien looked around the cottage again, his meaning clear. In this place? Yes, here, where I've built something real, where people actually value me for more than my bloodline. You're being unreasonable. I'm being honest. Alara straightened, feeling the baby kick hard against her ribs. You want to know what I've learned these past months? I've learned that I'm stronger than anyone, including me, ever believed. I've learned that I can survive without titles, without money, without a husband who sees me as a transaction. I've learned that I have value beyond what I can produce. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I never saw you as just a transaction. Didn't you? No, He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I cared about you. In my way. Your way wasn't enough. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with everything unsaid. Finally, Lucien spoke. Come back, please. Not like before. We can renegotiate the terms. You can have your own quarters, your own household, whatever you need. I don't need anything from you. The baby does. His voice hardened slightly. He deserves to grow up with every advantage. Education, position, security. Can you give him that here? It was a low blow, and they both knew it. Alara felt it land, felt the doubt creep in. Could she give her son everything he needed? Or was she being selfish, choosing her pride over his future? Get out, she said quietly. Alara, get out! The words came out louder than she intended, sharp enough to make Mrs. Givens move toward them. You don't get to come here and question my ability to care for my child. You don't get to act like you're the reasonable one. You threw us away, Lucien. Live with that choice. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse, watched him ride away with his guards flanking him. Only when they were gone did she let herself shake. Mrs. Givens was there immediately, guiding her to a chair. Breathe, my lady, just breathe. Did I make a mistake? Alara whispered. Should I have? No. Mrs. Givens' voice was firm. You stood your ground. That took courage. It felt like stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Alara laughed weakly, then gasped as a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. It passed quickly, but Mrs. Givens noticed. How often are you getting those? The older woman asked carefully. Today? That's the third one. Mrs. Givens' expression went serious. We need to get Mara. Now. It's nothing. Just stress. My lady, I've had 6 children. I know what early labor looks like. She was already pulling on her cloak. Stay here. Don't move. I'll be back as fast as I can. She was out the door before Alara could protest. Alara sat alone in the cottage, one hand pressed to her belly, feeling her son move restlessly inside her. Too early. It was too early. She wasn't due for another 2 months. Another pain came, stronger this time, and she gripped the arms of the chair. Not yet, she whispered to her unborn child. Please, not yet. Mara arrived within the hour, her face grim and focused. She examined Alara with practiced efficiency, asking sharp questions, checking vitals, assessing the situation. "It's not full labor," she said finally, "but it's definitely preterm contractions, brought on by stress, most likely." "The Duke," Mrs. Givens said darkly. "He shouldn't have come. What's done is done." Mara turned to Alara. "You need complete bed rest. No exceptions. No treating patients. No walking to the village. Nothing. If we can keep this baby inside you for another few weeks, his chances improve dramatically." "I can't just—" "You can and you will." Mara's voice was iron. "I'm not losing you or this baby because you're too stubborn to rest. Understand?" Alara nodded weakly. The next weeks were torture, lying in bed day after day feeling useless, listening to people come to the cottage asking for help and having to turn them away. Mrs. Givens handled what she could, and Mara stopped by daily, but Alara felt like she was going mad with inactivity. Worse were the nightmares, dreams where the baby came too early, too small, where she held a lifeless bundle and screamed and no one heard. Dreams where Lucien appeared and took the child from her arms, and she was too weak to fight. She woke from them gasping, shaking, her hands pressed to her belly to feel the reassuring kicks within. "He's strong," Mrs. Givens would say, sitting beside her in the dark. "Just like his mother." "I don't feel strong." Strong people rarely do. March came in cold but clear. The contractions had stopped, and Mara cautiously allowed Alara to move around the cottage, though still no strenuous work. It was during one of these careful walks around the main room that the second knock came. This time it wasn't Lucien. It was a woman Alara had never seen before, tall, elegant, with silver-threaded hair and eyes like chips of ice. She wore traveling clothes of obvious quality, and she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of nobility. "Lady Whitcomb," she said, her voice cultured and cold. "I am Duchess Margot Varick, Lucien's mother. We need to talk about your bastard." Mrs. Givens moved to block the doorway, but Alara waved her aside. "Let her in." The Duchess entered, her gaze sweeping the cottage with barely concealed disdain. "So this is where my son installed you. How rustic." "What do you want?" Alara asked flatly. "I want to discuss the situation you've created." Margot settled into a chair without being invited. "You're carrying a child you claim is my son's heir. A claim that, conveniently, you only made after being exiled. I didn't make any claim. Lucien discovered it himself, because you chose to reveal it." Margot's smile was sharp. "Clever timing. Wait until you're desperate, then produce an heir to force your way back into the family." Alara's hands clenched. "I never wanted back into your family." "Then what do you want?" "To be left alone." Margot laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, my dear, that's not an option anymore. You're carrying Varick blood. That makes you relevant whether you like it or not." "The baby is mine." "The baby," Margot said precisely, "is leverage, and you're not equipped to understand the game you're playing. So let me lay out your options very clearly. You can return to the manor, submit to a proper examination by our physician to verify the pregnancy and paternity, and accept whatever terms the family council deems appropriate. Or what?" Margot's expression went cold. "Or we take steps to ensure the child's well-being by other means. The family has considerable influence. It would be unfortunate if your allowance were to be cut off entirely, if this cottage were to be reclaimed, if the local magistrate were to receive concerns about your fitness as a mother." The threat was clear. Alara felt ice flooding her veins. "You can't do that." "Can't I?" Margot stood. "You're a disgraced noblewoman living alone in the wilderness, playing at being a healer. It wouldn't be difficult to paint you as unstable, unfit, dangerous even. People here know me. They trust me. Peasants," Margot waved a dismissive hand. "Their testimony means nothing against the word of a duchess. Now I'm giving you 1 week to make the sensible choice. Come back voluntarily, or we'll take what's ours by force." She swept toward the door, then paused. "And Lady Whitcomb? If you think Lucien will protect you, you're wrong. He may have a guilty conscience, but family comes first. It always has." She was gone before Alara could respond. Mrs. Givens locked the door behind her, her face pale. "My lady, she can't actually—" "She can." Alara's voice was hollow. The family has the magistrate in their pocket, the local lords, everyone who matters. If they decide to take my son, she couldn't finish the sentence. For the first time since her exile began, Elara felt true fear. Not for herself, but for the child she carried. The son who was already more real to her than anything else in the world. They would take him. If she didn't comply, if she didn't bend, they would find a way to take him from her. Unless she did something first. Something bold. Something they wouldn't expect. An idea was forming, dangerous and desperate, but it was all she had. She looked at Mrs. Givens. How far is it to the border? To Westmark territory? Mrs. Givens' eyes went wide. 2 days' ride, maybe 3 in your condition. But my lady, you can't be thinking, they can't touch me if I'm not in Varric anymore. Elara was already moving toward the stairs, her mind racing. Westmark has different laws. The family council has no authority there. You'd be giving up everything. The cottage, the allowance, any claim to... I don't care about claims. Elara turned and she could feel the fierce determination burning in her chest. I care about my son, and I will not let them take him from me. Mrs. Givens stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. When do we leave? We. Elara stared at Mrs. Givens, surprised by the certainty in the older woman's voice. You think I'm letting you ride 2 days to the border alone, 8 months pregnant? Mrs. Givens was already moving, pulling down a traveling pack from the high shelf. I've lost enough people I cared about. I'm not losing you too. The words hit Elara hard, unexpected warmth flooding through her chest. Mrs. Givens, Petra. The older woman turned, her expression softer than Elara had ever seen it. If we're running from duchesses and crossing borders together, you might as well use my name. Petra. Elara tested the word, feeling something shift between them. Thank you. Thank me when we're safe. Petra was all business now, sorting through supplies with practiced efficiency. We'll need food that won't spoil, warm clothes, enough coin to get us established somewhere new, and we'll need to leave tonight. Tonight? Elara's hand went to her belly. But Mara said I need to avoid stress. Stress is the Varric family showing up with soldiers to drag you back in chains. Petra pulled out a heavy wool cloak. We move now, or we don't move at all. She was right. Elara knew it, even as every instinct screamed that this was madness. Running while pregnant in early March toward a border she'd never crossed, into territory where she had no connections and no protection. But staying meant losing her son. That wasn't a choice at all. I need to tell Mara, Elara said. No. Petra's voice was firm. The fewer people who know, the better. If the Duchess comes asking questions, Mara can honestly say she doesn't know where we went. She'll worry. She'll understand. Petra pressed the cloak into Elara's hands. Now pack what matters and nothing else. We travel light, or we don't travel at all. Elara climbed the stairs to her small bedroom, each step an effort. Her body was heavy, ungainly, not built for running. But she'd learned these past months that necessity could push you past what seemed possible. She packed quickly. A change of clothes, Mara's journal of remedies, a few basic supplies for treating injuries. At the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in cloth, was the one piece of jewelry she'd kept from her old life. Her mother's ring, a simple band of silver with a small sapphire. She slipped it into her pocket. Everything else could burn for all she cared. Downstairs, Petra had assembled an impressive collection of supplies considering the short notice. Food, water skins, bandages, a small knife, flint for starting fires. She'd even found 2 heavy traveling cloaks and a pair of sturdy boots that might actually fit Elara's swollen feet. There's a farmer 2 miles south, Owen Marsh, Petra said, tying down the pack. He owes me a favor. He'll lend us a wagon and horse, no questions asked. A wagon? Elara frowned. That'll be slow. You can't ride horseback in your condition. Not for 2 days. Petra's tone left no room for argument. We'll be slower, but we'll get there. That's what matters. They left as the sun was setting, slipping out the back of the cottage like thieves. Elara cast one last look at the small building that had been her refuge, her transformation, her salvation. She wondered if she'd ever see it again. Owen Marsh was a man of few words and sharp eyes. He took in Elara's condition, Petra's grim expression, and the hurried nature of their request, and asked exactly 0 questions. Take the brown mare, he said, gesturing to a sturdy-looking horse hitched to a worn but functional wagon. "She's steady, won't spook easy. Bring her back when you can or don't. Either way, we're square." "Thank you," Elara said, meaning it. Owen nodded once, then turned and walked back to his barn, deliberately not watching them leave. The first few hours of travel were tense but uneventful. Petra drove while Elara huddled in the back of the wagon, wrapped in blankets, trying to keep warm as night fell hard and cold around them. The road was rough, every bump and jolt sending fresh aches through her body. The baby was active, squirming and kicking as if sensing his mother's anxiety. "We'll be all right," Elara whispered to him, one hand pressed to her belly. "I promise, we'll be all right." She didn't know if she believed it. They traveled through the night, Petra pushing the mare as fast as she dared without risking injury to the horse or Elara. They passed through sleeping villages, skirted around the main roads where Varric patrols might be watching, stuck to the rough back ways that only locals would know. Dawn found them exhausted and still miles from the border. Petra pulled the wagon off the road into a small copse of trees that offered some cover. "We need to rest. The horse needs rest. And you need to eat." Elara tried to protest, but her body betrayed her. She was shaking with fatigue, her back screaming from hours of jostling, her feet swollen despite not walking. Petra made a cold camp, no fire that might draw attention, and forced bread and dried meat into Alara's hands. "Eat, all of it." The food tasted like dust, but Elara choked it down. They couldn't afford weakness now. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, Petra was shaking her awake, her face pale and frightened. "Riders," she hissed, "coming fast from the north." Elara scrambled upright, ignoring the sharp protest from her body. Through the trees she could see them, 4 men on horseback, wearing Varric colors. They'd been found. "How did they—" Elara started. "Doesn't matter." Petra was already moving, unhitching the horse with quick, practiced motions. "The wagon's too slow. We're not outrunning them like this." "What are you doing?" "You're taking the horse, riding east. There's an old shepherd's hut about 5 miles that way. You can hide there until—" "No!" Elara grabbed Petra's arm. "I can't ride. You said so yourself. You can't get caught." Petra's eyes were fierce. "If they take you back, everything we've done is for nothing, so you ride and I'll delay them." "They'll arrest you." "I'm a servant." "What are they going to charge me with? Helping my lady travel?" Petra cupped Elara's face with both hands. "Listen to me. You are stronger than you think. You've proven that a dozen times over. Now prove it one more time. Ride east. Find the hut. Wait for nightfall. Then keep going to the border." "Petra, no arguments. Go." She practically shoved Elara toward the horse. Alara's hands were shaking as she tried to mount, her pregnant belly making it nearly impossible. On the third try, she managed to haul herself up, gasping with the effort. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could hear their voices calling to each other. Petra slapped the horse's flank hard. "Go!" The mare bolted. "Mare?" Elara clung to the reins, her thighs screaming as she tried to keep her seat. She'd ridden before, in her old life, but never like this. Never alone, never pregnant, never running for her freedom. Behind her, she heard Petra's voice, loud and indignant. "What's the meaning of this? You nearly ran me down." Then the trees swallowed the sound, and Elara was alone. She rode hard, harder than she should have, branches whipping at her face and arms. Every stride sent jolts through her body, and she felt something warm and wet between her legs. Not now. Please, not now. The shepherd's hut appeared like a mirage, a small, half-collapsed structure that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Elara practically fell off the horse, her legs giving out the moment her feet touched ground. She stumbled inside, collapsing against the far wall. Her hands went to her belly, feeling for the baby's movement. There. A kick. He was still fighting. The wetness between her legs wasn't blood, she realized with weak relief, just her water breaking early from the stress and exertion, which meant labor was coming. Soon. She laughed, a broken, slightly hysterical sound. Of course it was happening now, in an abandoned hut, miles from help, while she was running from soldiers. Perfect timing. The first real contraction hit like a fist to the gut, stealing her breath. She'd felt preterm contractions before, but this was different. This was real. This was happening. "Not yet," she gasped to her son. "Please, just a little longer." But babies didn't negotiate. Hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Alara lost track of time, lost track of everything except the relentless rhythm of her body trying to expel the child it had carried for 8 months. Too early. Still too early. She tried to remember everything Mara had taught her about childbirth, but pain scrambled her thoughts. She knew she should be timing contractions, tracking their frequency, should be preparing, positioning herself, doing something. Instead, she could only grip the rotting wood of the hut's wall and try not to scream. Twilight was falling when she heard the horse outside. For a moment, wild hope surged through her. Petra. Petra had escaped, had found her, had come to help. Then a male voice called out, "Lady Whitcomb, I know you're in there." Not Petra, Lucienne. Alara tried to stand to present some kind of defense, but another contraction hit and she crumpled. She heard footsteps, saw the door swing open, saw her husband, former husband, silhouetted against the dying light. He took one look at her and went pale. "Alaris, don't." She held up a shaking hand. "Don't come closer." He ignored her, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands hovered over her, uncertain. "You're in labor." "Brilliant observation. How long?" "Hours." The word came out as a gasp. "Since this afternoon." "Alone?" His voice cracked. "You've been doing this alone?" "Didn't have much choice, did I?" She glared at him through the pain. "Your mother made it clear what happens if I don't comply. So I ran, and here we are." Lucien's jaw tightened. "My mother had no right." "Your mother has every right because you gave it to her." Another contraction built, and Alara couldn't hold back the cry of pain. "When you cast me out, when you decided I was worthless, you gave your family permission to treat me like property. I never wanted that. What you wanted doesn't matter anymore." The contraction peaked, and for a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only endure. When it passed, Lucienne was staring at her with something that looked like horror. "You need help, a midwife, a physician. I'll ride back, bring—" "There's no time." Alara knew it in her bones. The baby was coming, ready or not. "And I don't want your help." "Too bad." His voice went hard, the Duke returning. "I'm not leaving you to deliver alone in a ruin. You don't get a say." "I'm making it my say." He shrugged off his cloak, spreading it on the ground. "Now either you let me help or I physically move you. Your choice." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to go to hell, but another contraction was building and she didn't have the strength for pride anymore. "Fine," she spat, "but after this, you leave. You let us go. You tell your mother and your family council that you couldn't find me." "Alara, promise me, Lucienne, or I swear I will crawl out of this hut and die in the woods before I let you take my son." He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "I promise. After the baby comes, I let you go." It was probably a lie. Lucienne was good at lies wrapped in formal promises, but it was all she had. The next hours were brutal. Lucienne proved surprisingly competent, which made sense. He'd grown up around horses and livestock, had probably seen more births than most noblemen. He knew how to stay calm, how to encourage without being patronizing, how to make himself useful. "Breathe through it," he said during a particularly vicious contraction. "Don't fight it. Let your body do the work." "Easy for you to say," Alara gasped. "I know." And there was something in his voice, genuine regret, maybe even sorrow. "I know this is my fault. If I hadn't been such a fool, later." She gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. "Blame yourself later. Right now I need you to focus." He focused. When the urge to push finally came, overwhelming and undeniable, Alara was beyond exhausted. Every muscle in her body was screaming. She'd been in labor for nearly 12 hours, and she had nothing left. "I can't," she whispered. "Lucienne, I can't do this." "Yes, you can." He moved behind her, supporting her weight, his voice steady in her ear. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived my cruelty. You built a life from nothing. You rode 8 months pregnant to escape my family. You can do this." "I'm so tired." "I know. But our son needs you to be strong one more time. Can you do that?" "Our son." The words should have made her angry, but instead they gave her something to hold on to. Their son. The boy she'd carried, protected, fought for. He was depending on her. She bore down, pushing with everything she had left. The pain was indescribable, worse than anything she'd imagined. She felt herself tearing, felt something fundamental breaking inside her, and she screamed. Again, Lucian urged. He's crowning. One more, Elara, one more. She pushed again, and the world went white with agony. And then suddenly, impossibly, a baby's cry. Thin, reedy, furious at being pulled into the cold world too soon, but alive. Lucien moved quickly, wrapping the tiny, slippery body in his cloak. "It's a boy," he said, his voice rough. "A son." Elara's arms came up automatically, and Lucien placed the baby against her chest. He was so small, smaller than any infant she'd helped Mara deliver. His skin was almost translucent, and she could count his ribs, see every fragile bone. But he was breathing, fighting. "Hello?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my brave boy." The baby squirmed against her, his tiny fist curling around her finger with surprising strength. She looked down at him, at his dark hair, his scrunched face, the way his eyes squinted against the dim light, and felt her entire world realign. This was what mattered, not titles or territory or the approval of people who'd never valued her, just this tiny, fierce life she'd created. She became aware of Lucien watching them, his expression unreadable. "He needs a name," he said quietly. Elara looked up at him, this man who'd hurt her so badly, who'd also just helped bring their son into the world. "I know what I want to call him." "What?" "Aldrich." It had been her grandfather's name, a man who'd valued her curiosity and strength when everyone else had tried to make her docile. Aldrich Whitcomb. Lucien flinched. "Whitcomb? Not Varick." "He's my son." "He's our son." "No." Elara's voice was quiet but immovable. "You promised, Lucien. After the baby came, you'd let us go." "That was before—" He stopped, looking at the infant, and something in his face cracked. "Elara, I can't just let you walk away with my heir. The family would never—" "The family," she laughed bitterly. "Always the family. Never what's right, never what you actually want." "You don't know what I want." "Then tell me." Her voice rose, startling the baby, who began to fuss. She lowered it, rocking him gently. "For once in your life, Lucien, tell me the truth. What do you want?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I want to deserve you, both of you." He looked at the baby, and there were tears on his face. "I want to be the man who could have kept you, who could have seen your worth before you had to prove it to the world. But I'm not. I'm the man who threw you away and spent months lying to himself that it was the right choice." Elara stared at him, seeing him, really seeing him, maybe for the first time. Not as the cold duke, not as her husband or her enemy, but as a man who'd made terrible mistakes and was drowning in regret. It would be easy to hate him, safer even, but she was so tired of hate. "You can't have us back," she said. "Not the way things were. Not as your property or your redemption project." "I know, but—" She hesitated, the word catching in her throat. "If you meant what you said about deserving us, you could start by standing between us and your family, by choosing us over them." Lucien looked up sharply. "You're asking me to defy the family council? My mother? I'm asking you to prove you're more than their puppet." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Before Lucien could answer, voices erupted outside. Multiple voices, shouting orders, the sound of horses, of men dismounting. Lucien's head snapped toward the door. "Stay here." He stood, moving to the entrance just as it burst open. 5 men poured in, all wearing Varick colors. Leading them was Captain Rennick, his face grim. "Your Grace," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We've been searching for hours. When you rode off alone—" He stopped, taking in the scene. Lucien standing protectively in front of Elara. The newborn baby in her arms, the blood and exhaustion written across both their faces. "Captain," Lucien said carefully, "I need you and your men to return to the manor." "Your Grace, the Duchess Margot sent us to—" "But I don't care what my mother sent you to do. I'm ordering you to leave." Rennick hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to Lucien and whatever orders he'd been given. "The Duchess said the child must be secured, for the safety of the line." "Secured." Lucien's voice went cold. "That's an interesting word for taking a newborn from his mother." Your Grace, leave, now. That's an order from your Duke. Rennick's jaw tightened. For a moment, Alara thought he might refuse. Then, slowly, he bowed. As you command, Your Grace. He turned to go, then paused. But, sir, the Duchess will not be pleased. When she learns, she can be as displeased as she likes. Lucian stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Tell my mother that I've found Lady Whitcomb and our son. Tell her they're under my direct protection. And tell her that anyone who attempts to interfere will answer to me personally. Rennick's eyes widened, then he bowed again, deeper this time. Yes, Your Grace. The soldiers filed out, and Alara heard them mounting, riding away into the night. Lucien stood at the door for a long moment, his back to her. When he finally turned around, he looked exhausted. That, he said quietly, is going to cause problems. You just defied your mother for us. Alara's voice was barely a whisper. Why? He crossed the space between them, kneeling beside her again. This time, when he looked at his son, there was something fierce in his expression. Because you were right. I've spent my whole life doing what the family wanted, what was expected, what was politically advantageous, and it cost me everything that mattered. He reached out, hesitating, then gently touched the baby's tiny hand. I can't undo what I did, but I can choose differently now. They'll come for us, Alara said. Your mother, the council, let them. Lucian's jaw set in a way she'd never seen before. I'm done being their instrument. If they want to fight, they'll get one. Alara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this change was real, that he wouldn't crumble the first time his mother applied pressure. But little Aldrich was squirming against her chest, and she was bleeding heavily, and she was still miles from any kind of safety. I need help, she admitted, hating how weak her voice sounded. The bleeding, it's not stopping. Lucian's face went white. How bad? Bad enough. He moved quickly, checking the makeshift bandages he'd fashioned from his shirt. When he pulled them away, his expression grew grimmer. You need a healer, now. Mars in Grey Hollow. That's hours away, you won't make it. He looked around the ruined hut, thinking fast. There's a monastery about an hour north. The brothers there have a hospital. They treat travelers. If I ride hard, I can bring help back within 2 hours. You can't leave us here alone. I won't. He stood, moving to the door and calling out, Rennick! The captain appeared within moments. Your Grace, I need you to stay here. Guard Lady Whitcomb and the child with your life. No one, and I mean no one, gets near them. Understand? Rennick glanced at Alara, then back to Lucien. Yes, Your Grace. Lucien turned back to her. I'll be back as fast as I can. Just... His voice broke slightly. Just hold on, please. Then he was gone, running to his horse, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. Alara clutched Aldrich closer, feeling her strength ebbing with each heartbeat. The baby had gone quiet, either sleeping or too weak to cry. She couldn't tell which, and that terrified her. Rennick stood in the doorway, his hand on his sword, watching the darkness. Captain, Alara said, her voice thin, if I don't make it, you'll make it, my lady. If I don't, she continued, forcing the words out, promise me you'll protect him, from the family, from anyone who'd use him. Rennick looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. On my honor, my lady. No harm will come to your son. Alara closed her eyes, too tired to keep them open anymore. She felt herself drifting, the edges of the world going soft and gray. Somewhere far away, Aldrich made a small mewling sound. Stay with us, Rennick's voice, urgent now. Lady Whitcomb, stay awake. But the darkness was so inviting, and she was so tired. The last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away was the sound of horses. Multiple horses coming fast, and a woman's voice, cold and imperious, cutting through the night. Stand aside, Captain. The child belongs to House Varick. Alara heard Rennick's voice as if from underwater, distorted and distant. Duchess Margot, I have orders from His Grace. Your Grace is not here, Margot's voice was ice. I am, and I'm exercising my authority as matriarch of House Varick. Now stand aside before I have you removed from your position. Alara forced her eyes open, fighting against the gray fog trying to pull her under. Through blurred vision, she saw Margot standing in the doorway, flanked by two men Alara didn't recognize. Behind them, more soldiers. "The baby," Margot said, stepping forward. "Give him to me." "No." The word came out barely a whisper, but Alara clutched Aldrich tighter against her chest. The infant stirred, making a weak sound. Margot's gaze shifted to Alara, and something almost like pity crossed her face. "You're dying, girl. Hemorrhaging. You can barely hold him. Let me take the child somewhere safe while you're tended to." "Liar." Alara's vision was swimming, but her grip on Aldrich didn't loosen. "You'll take him, and I'll never see him again." "You're being irrational. I'm being a mother." Alara tried to sit up straighter, failed, settled for glaring up at the older woman. "You threatened to take my son, to paint me as unfit. You think I'm stupid enough to trust you now?" Margot's expression hardened. "Captain Rennick, retrieve the child." Rennick didn't move. His hand stayed on his sword, but he made no move toward Alara. "Captain?" Margot's voice could have frozen fire. "That was an order. With respect, Duchess, I have orders from Duke Lucien himself. Lady Whitcomb and the child are under his direct protection." "Lucien isn't thinking clearly. He's emotionally compromised." "He's your son," Rennick interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. "And he's the Duke. His orders supersede yours." For a moment, Margot looked genuinely shocked. Then her face settled into cold fury. "You're making a mistake, Captain. Perhaps." Rennick drew his sword, not threatening, but ready. "But it's mine to make." The standoff might have held if Alara hadn't felt the warm gush of blood between her legs intensify. She gasped, her vision going white at the edges. "She's bleeding out," one of Margot's men said, stepping forward. "If we don't get her help soon—" "Then help her," Rennick snapped. "But the child stays with his mother." Margot's jaw tightened. For a long moment she stood frozen, clearly calculating. Then she turned sharply to one of her men. "Fetch Brother Thomas from the monastery. Tell him it's urgent." The man ran. Margot looked back at Alara, and her expression was unreadable. "You think I'm a monster. I understand that. But I'm not going to let you die in a shepherd's hut out of spite. The family needs that child, yes, but Lucien—" She stopped, something flickering across her face. "My son cares about you, fool that he is. If you die, it will destroy him." "Touching," Alara managed, though her words were slurring. "Still not giving you my baby." "I'm not asking anymore." Margot moved to the corner of the hut, deliberately putting distance between herself and Alara. "The healer will come. He'll stop the bleeding, and then we'll have a conversation about what happens next." Alara wanted to argue, but the darkness was pulling at her again, insistent and seductive. She felt herself starting to slip. "Stay awake!" Rennick was suddenly beside her, his voice urgent. "My lady, you have to stay awake." "Trying," she mumbled. "Not working. Then try harder." He pressed something cloth against her, trying to staunch the bleeding. "His Grace will never forgive me if I let you die." "Tell Lucien—" The words were getting harder to form. "Tell him Aldrich is his, but he has to earn him. Can't just take—" The world tilted sideways. When Alara woke, she was moving. The jostling told her she was in a wagon, lying on something soft. Her body felt like it was made of lead, every muscle screaming in protest at the slightest movement. "Easy," Petra's voice, close and familiar. "Don't try to move yet." Alara's eyes flew open. "Petra, how—" "The Duke found me on the road, brought me along with the healer." Petra's face was creased with worry, but she was smiling. "You gave us quite a scare." "Aldrich." Alara tried to sit up, panic flooding through her. "Right here." Petra shifted, and Alara saw her son, wrapped in clean blankets, sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle beside her. "Breathing fine." The healer checked him over. "He's small, but he's a fighter." Relief hit Alara so hard she felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're not out of danger." Petra dabbed at Alara's forehead with a cool cloth. "Brother Thomas managed to stop the worst of the bleeding, but you lost a lot of blood. You need rest, proper food, and time to heal." "Where are we going?" Petra hesitated. "Back to Varick Manor." "No." Alara tried to sit up again, ignoring the way her vision swam. "I won't." It wasn't up for debate. A new voice, male and calm. Alara turned her head to see a middle-aged man in simple brown robes sitting at the front of the wagon. Brother Thomas, presumably. You need medical care that only the manor can provide, and the baby needs warmth and regular feeding. This isn't negotiable if you want to survive. I'd rather die. No, you wouldn't. The healer's voice was kind but firm. You've fought too hard to give up now, and that baby needs his mother. Alara wanted to argue, but she was so tired, and he was right. She'd fought so hard, survived so much. Giving up now would make it all meaningless. Lucienne, she said. Where is he? Riding ahead, Petra said. He wanted to make sure everything was ready for you at the manor, and... She paused, choosing her words carefully. He wanted to have words with his mother before you arrived. That couldn't be good. They traveled for what felt like hours, though Alara kept drifting in and out of consciousness. Every time she woke, Petra was there, checking on her, adjusting her blankets, making sure Aldrich was still breathing. The manor appeared through the pre-dawn mist like something out of a nightmare. Massive, imposing, beautiful in a cold way that made Alara's chest tighten. She'd thought she'd never see it again. She'd hoped she'd never see it again. Servants came running as the wagon pulled up, their faces shocked at the sight of her. Alara recognized some of them, the head housekeeper, a few of the maids who'd dressed her in what felt like another lifetime. None of them met her eyes. Lucien was there, striding down the steps with barely contained urgency. He looked terrible, exhausted, disheveled, his fine clothes rumpled and stained. Get her inside, he ordered. The blue suite's been prepared. Brother Thomas, you'll have everything you need. Petra? He turned to the older woman. Thank you for staying with her. I wasn't leaving her, Petra said simply. Alara felt herself being lifted, carried up the stairs by two strong footmen. She tried to protest. She wasn't an invalid, but her body refused to cooperate. Everything hurt, and she was so weak she could barely lift her head. The blue suite was one of the guest chambers, far from the room she'd shared with Lucien during their marriage. Someone had filled it with fresh flowers, warm blankets, everything soft and comfortable. They laid her on the bed carefully, and Brother Thomas immediately began checking her over, his hands gentle but thorough. The bleeding stopped for now, he said after a moment, but you'll need constant monitoring. Any sign it starts again, I need to know immediately. He looked at Petra. Can you manage that? I can. Good. He turned to Lucien. Your Grace, I need to be frank. Lady Whitcomb has lost a dangerous amount of blood. The next few days will be critical. She needs complete rest, nutritious food, and no stress whatsoever. She'll have it, Lucien said. That includes family drama, Brother Thomas said pointedly. Whatever conflicts exist, they need to wait until she's stronger. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The healer left, and Petra busied herself settling Aldrich into a proper cradle that had appeared from somewhere. Alara watched her son sleep, marveling that something so small could contain so much life. I need to talk to you, Lucien said quietly. Later, Petra said firmly. She needs rest. It's important. So is her survival. Petra fixed him with a look that would have made generals quail. Your Grace, I've been serving your household for 20 years. In that time, I've learned when to bow and when to stand firm. This is me standing firm. Let her sleep. For a moment, Alara thought Lucien might pull rank. Instead, he just nodded wearily. You're right. I'm sorry. He looked at Alara. Rest. We'll talk when you're stronger. He left, and Alara let herself drift. The next days were a blur of sleeping and waking, of Brother Thomas checking her constantly, of Petra helping her feed Aldrich when she was strong enough to hold him. The baby was a hungry little thing, demanding food every few hours, his cries surprisingly strong for someone so small. Alara's body was healing slowly. The bleeding had stopped completely, and her strength was gradually returning. Brother Thomas seemed cautiously optimistic, though he still forbade her from doing anything more strenuous than sitting up. On the fourth day, Mara appeared. Alara was awake, holding Aldrich while Petra changed the bedding, when the door opened and the healer strode in like she owned the place. Well, Mara said, looking Alara up and down, you look like hell. Despite everything, Alara laughed. Nice to see you too. Mara crossed the room, peering at Aldrich with professional interest. He's tiny. He's premature. I can see that. Mara gently examined the baby, checking his color, his breathing, the way he responded to stimuli. But he's fighting. Good lung capacity, strong grip. He might be small, but he's not fragile. Takes after his mother, Petra said from across the room. Mara snorted. Clearly. She straightened, looking at Alara seriously. You should have sent for me when you went into labor. There wasn't time. There's always time. You know better than that. Mara's voice was sharp, but there was genuine concern underneath. You could have died. You almost did die. I know. Alara felt tears prickling at her eyes, surprising herself. I'm sorry, everything happened so fast and I was running and you're alive. The baby's alive. That's what matters. Mara sat on the edge of the bed. But now we need to talk about what happens next. What do you mean? I mean the whole village knows you're back at the manor, and they're not happy about it. Alara's stomach dropped. They think I abandoned them. Some do. Others think the Duke forced you back. Mara paused. Word is the Duchess Margot tried to take the baby. True? Yes. And the Duke stopped her? Yes. Mara nodded slowly. That's something, at least. But Alara, you need to understand, the people in Grey Hollow, they trusted you. They let you into their homes, their lives. If you disappear into this manor and become just another noble lady, they'll feel betrayed. I'm not... Alara stopped, frustrated. I don't know what I am anymore. Then figure it out. Mara stood. Because you're in a unique position. You're nobility who knows how to heal. You're a mother who understands struggle. You could do real good if you choose to, or you could let this place swallow you again. She left before Alara could respond. That night, Lucian finally came to talk. Alara was sitting up, holding Aldrich, when he knocked softly and entered. He looked better than he had, rested, clean, back in his ducal finery. But there was something different about him, something uncertain. How are you feeling? He asked. Better, stronger. Alara adjusted Aldrich, who was making small snuffling sounds. Thank you for everything you did, for getting help, for bringing Petra, for... She stopped, not sure how to articulate it all. You don't need to thank me. Lucian moved closer, his eyes on the baby. May I hold him? Alara hesitated, then nodded. She carefully transferred Aldrich to Lucian's arms, showing him how to support the tiny head. Lucian looked down at his son, and his expression crumbled. He's perfect. He's too small and stubborn, and he cries at 3 a.m. like he's being murdered. Perfect, Lucian repeated, his voice rough. They sat in silence for a moment, the baby between them. I spoke to my mother, Lucian said finally. It didn't go well. I can imagine. She's furious, claims I'm being manipulated, that you're using the baby to secure your position. He looked up at Alara. I told her she was wrong, that you tried to leave, to give up any claim to the Varric name, that I was the one who'd failed you. Alara studied his face, trying to determine if this was genuine or another manipulation. What did she say? That I'm a fool, that you'll destroy the family, that I'm choosing sentiment over duty. His jaw tightened. I told her that for once in my life, I was choosing what was right over what was expected. And the family council? They're divided. Some agree with my mother. Others think the scandal of you giving birth in a shepherd's hut is worse than you returning to the manor. He smiled bitterly. Apparently a nearly dead duchess is more palatable than a thriving exile. Lucienne, I know what you're going to say. That you won't come back as my wife, that too much has happened, that you don't trust me. He carefully transferred Aldrich back to her. You're right. I don't deserve your trust, but I want to earn it, and I want to earn the right to know my son. How? Alara asked bluntly. How do you plan to earn it? By giving you what I should have given you from the beginning. Freedom, choice, respect. He pulled a document from his jacket. This is a legal agreement I've had drawn up. It establishes you as an independent member of the household with your own income, your own quarters, and full autonomy over Aldrich's upbringing. You're not answerable to me or my mother. You can come and go as you please. The only requirement is that you allow me to be part of his life. Alara stared at the document. Why would you do this? Because I'm trying to be the man you deserved. Even if it's too late for us, it's not too late for him. Lucian stood. Read it over. Have a solicitor review it if you want. I'll abide by whatever decision you make. He was almost to the door when Alara spoke. I want to continue my healing work. He turned back. What? In Grey Hollow, with Mara. I want to keep helping people. She met his eyes. If I stay here, that's my condition. I'm not going to sit in this manor and host tea parties while people suffer because they can't afford proper medical care. Lucian looked stunned. You want to be a working healer while living at Varick Manor? Yes. The family will be scandalized. Good. Alara smiled slightly. Maybe it's time the family learned to be scandalized. For the first time since she'd known him, Lucian laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite chuckle of a nobleman, but genuine, surprised amusement. You're extraordinary, he said. I don't know how I never saw it before. You weren't looking. No, I wasn't. His expression sobered. But I'm looking now. And if you want to turn the noble ladies of the county apoplectic by treating peasants, I'll support you. Though I can't promise my mother won't try to have you committed. Let her try. Alara looked down at Aldrich, who had fallen asleep in her arms. I'm done being afraid of your family. The next week, Alara was finally strong enough to leave her bed. Brother Thomas pronounced her on the mend, though he still cautioned against overexertion. Petra helped her dress in one of the simpler gowns from her old wardrobe, and together they made their way downstairs. The servant stopped and stared as she passed. Alara kept her head high, refusing to show how much their attention unnerved her. She found Lucien in his study, bent over a stack of papers. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his face. You're up. I was going insane in that room. She sat in the chair across from him, grateful to be off her feet. I need to talk to you about something. All right, I want to go to Grey Hollow, tomorrow. I need to see Mara, need to explain to the villagers what happened. She paused. And I need to start working again. Alara, you just gave birth 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to be hauling water or delivering babies, but I can consult. I can teach. I can be useful. She leaned forward. Please, I need this. Lucien studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll arrange an escort. And a proper carriage, not a farm wagon. I don't need... You're the mother of my heir, traveling through Varick lands. You need an escort. His tone left no room for argument. Besides, I'm coming with you. Alara blinked. What? Why? Because I want to see where you've been living, what you've been doing. He smiled slightly. And because if I'm going to support your work, I should probably understand it. The next morning, they set out. Alara held Aldrich carefully as the carriage bounced along the road. He was bundled against the spring cold, sleeping peacefully despite the motion. Beside her, Lucien watched the countryside pass with an expression she couldn't quite read. It's different out here, he said finally. Rougher than I expected. It's real, Alara said. Not manicured gardens and perfect stonework, just land and people trying to survive. Grey Hollow appeared around midday, and Alara felt her heart clench at the familiar sight of it. The muddy square, the crooked church steeple, the general store with its faded sign. Home, in a way Varick Manor had never been. News of their arrival spread fast. By the time the carriage stopped, a crowd had gathered, wary, curious, some openly hostile. Alara stepped down carefully, Aldrich in her arms. The crowd went silent. I know what you're thinking, Alara said, her voice carrying across the square. That I abandoned you, that I went back to being a fine lady and forgot about all of you. Someone in the crowd muttered agreement. You're right to be angry. Alara shifted Aldrich slightly. I left without explanation, but I didn't have a choice. The Duke's family was threatening to take my son. So I ran, and in running, I nearly died. She pulled back Aldrich's blanket, showing them his tiny face. This is Aldrich. He came into the world too early, too small, in a shepherd's hut with nothing but determination and luck, keeping him alive. The Duke, she gestured to Lucien, who had stepped down from the carriage. He helped deliver him, saved both our lives. The crowd was listening now, really listening. I'm back at the manor because that's where we'll be safe. But I'm not done being a healer. I'm not done being part of this community. She met their eyes, one by one. If you'll have me, I want to keep working with Mara, keep helping where I can. I can't be here every day like before, but I can be here when it matters. Silence. Then Nell Braddock, The woman whose life Alara had saved in the winter pushed through the crowd. "You saved my life when you had every reason to turn me away," Nell said loudly. "You're one of us, my lady. Title or not, you're one of us." Others murmured agreement. The hostility in the air began to ease, replaced by something cautious but hopeful. Mara appeared from her cottage, arms crossed. "You're late," Alara smiled. "I was busy nearly dying." "Excuses." But Mara was smiling too. She turned to Lucien. "So you're the Duke who threw her out." Lucien had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I am." "And now you're what? Here to make amends?" "I'm here to support my—" He paused, glancing at Alara. "To support Lady Whitcomb in her work." "Good." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Because if you hurt her again, Duke or not, you'll answer to me, and everyone in this village. Understood?" "Understood," Lucien said quietly. The tension broke then, people beginning to disperse back to their work. A few approached Alara, asking about the baby, offering congratulations, welcoming her back. Mara pulled her aside. "You're serious about continuing the work?" "Completely." "Even with a newborn?" "I'll figure it out." Alara looked down at Aldrich. "I have to. This is who I am now. I can't go back to being just a noble wife." "You were never just anything." Mara glanced at Lucien, who was being shown around the village square by a few of the braver residents. "He seems different than I expected." "He's trying." Alara watched her husband, former husband, current husband. She still wasn't sure. Interact with people who would have been beneath his notice 6 months ago. Whether it lasts, I don't know, but he's trying. Over the following weeks, a strange new rhythm emerged. Alara split her time between the manor and Grey Hollow, bringing Aldrich with her when she could, leaving him with Petra when she couldn't. She worked with Mara 3 days a week, treating patients, teaching what she'd learned, constantly expanding her knowledge. The noble families of the county were scandalized, just as Lucien had predicted. Invitations dried up. The family council held emergency meetings about the dignity of House Varick. Duchess Margot refused to speak to either of them. Alara found she didn't care. She was doing real work, saving actual lives, making a difference that mattered more than any dinner party or social connection ever could. And slowly, grudgingly, people began to respect it. It started small, a lord whose daughter was sick asking if Lady Whitcomb might consult, since the physicians had failed. A countess requesting advice about setting up a hospital on her estate. Word spreading that the Duchess of Varick, because Lucien had refused to annul the marriage, insisting they remain legally bound, was doing something unprecedented. One afternoon in late April, Alara was working in Grey Hollow when a messenger arrived from the capital. "Letter for Lady Whitcomb," he said, handing her an official-looking envelope. She opened it carefully, reading the contents twice to make sure she understood. It was from the Royal College of Physicians. They'd heard about her work and wanted to invite her to present at their annual conference, to share her methods of treating common ailments, her approaches to community health, her strategies for making medical care accessible. A duchess speaking to the most prestigious medical body in the country. It was absurd. It was perfect. "I'm going," she told Lucien that evening, showing him the letter. He read it, a smile spreading across his face. "Of course you are. When?" 2 months. "I'll arrange everything." He paused. "Would you like me to come with you?" Alara considered. 3 months ago, the thought of Lucien accompanying her anywhere would have been unbearable. But now, "Yes," she said, "I think I would." That night, after Aldrich was asleep and the manor was quiet, Alara stood in the gardens and looked up at the stars. She'd been cast out, humiliated, left to die. She'd survived through spite and stubbornness and the help of people who saw her value when her own husband couldn't. She'd transformed herself from a discarded duchess into a healer, a mother, a force of actual change. And now she was standing in the place that had rejected her, but on her own terms. Not as Lucien's wife or the family's pawn, but as herself. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined, but it was better than anything she could have planned. "I thought I'd find you here." Lucien's voice came from behind her. She turned. He was carrying Aldrich, who had apparently woken and fussed until someone retrieved him. "He wanted his mother," Lucien said, handing the baby over. Alara took her son, feeling his small warmth against her chest. Thank you. They stood together in the garden, not quite touching, but not separate either, co-parents, allies. Maybe, eventually, something more. But for now, this was enough. I'm proud of you, Lucian said quietly, of what you've built, what you've become. Alara looked at him, seeing genuine admiration in his eyes. I didn't build it alone. No, but you let it. He touched Aldrich's tiny hand, and you're teaching him that nobility isn't about titles or bloodlines. It's about service, about using whatever power you have to help others. Is that what you believe now? It's what you've taught me to believe. He met her eyes. You've changed everything, Alara. The family, the expectations, the entire meaning of what it is to be Varric. My mother thinks it's a disaster. I think it's the best thing that's ever happened to us. Aldrich chose that moment to yawn enormously, his tiny face scrunching up in a way that was impossibly endearing. Alara laughed, and Lucienne laughed with her, and for the first time since their marriage, they felt like partners. The partnership didn't come easy. For all Lucienne's talk of change and growth, old habits died hard. He still wanted to control things, to make decisions without consulting her, to treat her work as a charming hobby rather than a serious calling. They fought about it, loudly sometimes, usually late at night when Aldrich was finally asleep and exhaustion made them both raw. You can't just announce that I'll be hosting the spring gala, Alara snapped one evening in May, pacing the sitting room while Lucienne sat at his desk. I have actual work scheduled that day. It's one afternoon. It's the afternoon Mara and I plan to teach basic first aid to the farmers' wives. 20 women are counting on us. Lucian rubbed his temples. The gala is important for family relations. My mother has already... Your mother can host it herself, or find someone else. I'm not available. Alara, you're being unreasonable. No, you're being dismissive. She stopped pacing, facing him directly. You say you support my work, but the moment it conflicts with your social obligations, suddenly mine don't matter. That's not fair, isn't it? She crossed her arms. When was the last time you rescheduled a council meeting because I needed you? When did you ever put my work first? The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Lucian spoke, his voice quiet. You're right. I'm sorry. Alara blinked, surprised. Lucian didn't apologize often, didn't admit fault easily. I'll tell my mother the gala needs to be moved, he continued, or that you won't be attending. Your choice. Move it, Alara said after a moment. I don't want to be petty, but I need you to understand this isn't a pastime for me. People depend on this work. I know. He stood, crossing to her. I'm trying, Alara, but I've spent my whole life thinking a certain way. Changing that doesn't happen overnight. I'm not asking for overnight. I'm asking for consistent effort. Then you'll have it. They were learning each other piece by piece, learning how to be partners instead of strangers bound by contract. It was messy and frustrating and sometimes felt impossible, but slowly it was working. The Royal College presentation loomed in June, and Alara found herself increasingly nervous as the date approached. What if they don't take me seriously? She asked Mara one afternoon while they were preparing remedies. I'm not a trained physician. I learned everything from you. You learned from experience, Mara corrected, from actually treating people, not just reading about it in books. That makes you more qualified than half those pompous academics. They're going to ask questions I can't answer. Then say you don't know. Mara looked at her sternly. Confidence isn't about knowing everything. It's about being honest about what you do know and not pretending otherwise. Petra, who was watching Aldrich in the corner, added her own opinion. You've faced down a duchess who wanted to steal your baby. You gave birth in a ruin. You survived being cast out with nothing. A room full of doctors should be easy compared to that. That's different. No, it's not, Petra said firmly. You've been tested in ways those men never will be. Don't let fancy titles intimidate you. The day before they were set to leave for the capital, disaster struck. A messenger arrived at dawn, pounding on the manor doors with urgent news. There was sickness in Westfield, the village 10 miles south. Fast spreading, hitting hard, people dying. Alara was dressed and gathering supplies before Lucian had finished reading the message. What are you doing? He asked. Going to help. Alara, we leave for the capital tomorrow. Then we'll leave late, or not at all. She was throwing herbs, bandages, medicines into her bag with quick efficiency. People are dying, Lucy. And the presentation can wait. She turned to face him. This is more important. She expected him to argue, to remind her about the opportunity, the prestige, how much this meant for her credibility. Instead, he said, I'm coming with you. You don't need to eat. I'm coming. His tone left no room for argument. If we're partners, we face these things together. They rode to Westfield with Mara, Brother Thomas, and Petra, who insisted on coming despite having no medical training. You'll need extra hands, she'd said, and that was that. What they found was worse than the message had conveyed. The sickness had hit fast: fever, vomiting, weakness. Already a dozen people were dead, and more were deteriorating by the hour. The local healer had been one of the first victims, leaving the village with no one who knew what to do. Cholera, Mara said grimly, examining one of the sick. From contaminated water, most likely. The well must be tainted. Alara's blood ran cold. Cholera outbreaks could devastate entire communities. Without proper treatment and sanitation, the death toll would climb fast. What do we do? The village elder asked, his face haggard with fear. Alara forced herself to think past the panic. First, we isolate the sick, set up a treatment area away from the healthy population. Second, we shut down the main well immediately. No one drinks from it. Third, we need clean water, lots of it. Any streams nearby? Half a mile east. Start hauling water from there, boil it before drinking. She turned to Mara. We'll need oral rehydration, sugar, salt, clean water. Can we make enough? If we work fast. They worked through the day and into the night, barely stopping. Alara moved from patient to patient, administering fluids, monitoring symptoms, doing everything she could to keep people alive. Lucienne worked alongside her, following her instructions without question, holding down thrashing patients while she got medicine into them, hauling water until his fine clothes were soaked and ruined. Brother Thomas set up a quarantine area while Petra organized the healthy villagers into teams, water carriers, food preparers, waste disposal. The woman had a gift for logistics that would have made generals weep with envy. By the second day, they'd managed to slow the spread. No new cases in 12 hours. The patients who'd been treated early were starting to stabilize. But 3 more had died overnight, including a child no older than 5. Alara stood over the small body, feeling the weight of failure press down on her chest. She'd tried everything, given the girl every treatment she knew, stayed up all night monitoring her. It hadn't been enough. You can't save everyone. Mara's voice was gentle. You know that. She was 5 years old. I know. Mara gripped her shoulder. But because of you, 20 others are still alive. Don't discount that. Lucian found her an hour later, sitting outside the treatment tent, staring at nothing. The well's been properly sealed, he said, settling beside her. We'll have masons out next week to dig a new one in a safer location. And I'm arranging for regular inspections of all wells in Varric territory. Alara nodded numbly. This isn't your fault, Lucian said quietly. I know. Logically, I know that. She turned to look at him, but it doesn't help. No, it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. I watched you today. The way you moved, the decisions you made. You saved lives, Alara. Real, measurable lives. And you did it without hesitation, without thinking about the cost to yourself. That's what healers do. That's what heroes do. He took her hand. And it made me realize something. The presentation tomorrow, you don't need it. You don't need the college's approval or their validation. You've already proven yourself where it matters. We should still go, we should. But not because you need them, because they need to hear what you have to say. He squeezed her hand. You're changing the way medicine is practiced in this country, whether they recognize it or not. They stayed in Westfield another 2 days, making sure the outbreak was fully contained, that the survivors were stable, that the village had what it needed going forward. By the time they left, exhausted and filthy, Alara had earned something more valuable than any title. The villagers' gratitude was real, unfeigned. They knew she'd saved them. More than that, she'd treated them like they mattered, like their lives were worth fighting for. As they rode back toward the manor, Alara noticed Lucienne was quiet, thoughtful. What are you thinking? She asked. That I've been ruling these lands for 6 years and never once visited Westfield. Never knew the well was in poor condition. Never thought to check. He looked at her. You've been working with common people for less than a year, and you knew exactly what they needed. You saw problems I've been blind to my entire life. You can't know everything. No, but I should have been looking, should have been asking. He paused. I want to do better, and I think I need your help to do it. They arrived at the capital 3 days late, rumpled and exhausted, with Aldrich fussing from the long journey and their presentation notes barely prepared. The Royal College of Physicians met in an imposing stone building that reeked of old money and older traditions. The physicians who greeted them, all men, all wearing elaborate robes, looked at Alara with barely concealed skepticism. Lady Whitcomb, the dean said, his tone polite but dismissive. We were concerned you might not make it. There was an outbreak in Westfield, Alara said evenly. Cholera. We stayed to contain it. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The physicians exchanged glances. Cholera? One of them said. How many dead? 15 total, but 23 survivors, which would have been 0 without intervention. What treatment protocol did you use? And just like that, they were listening. Alara spoke for an hour, describing her methods. The oral rehydration technique, the importance of clean water, the need to treat patients early and aggressively. She talked about making medicine accessible, about training community members in basic care, about prevention being as important as cure. The physicians asked sharp, probing questions. She answered honestly, admitting when she didn't know something, explaining her reasoning when she did. When she finished, the room was silent. Then the dean stood. Lady Whitcomb, your methods are unconventional. Here it comes, Alara thought, the polite dismissal. They're also, he continued, remarkably effective. We've been discussing the accessibility problem for years without practical solutions. You've actually implemented something that works. He paused. We'd like to invite you to join our research committee. Help us develop standards for community health practices across the country. Alara stared at him. You want me on your committee? Unless you're too busy saving villages, another physician said dryly. In which case, we understand. She looked at Lucien, who was smiling. I'd be honored, she said. That night, at the inn where they were staying, Alara finally let herself collapse. Aldrich was asleep in his cradle, and Lucien was reading correspondence by lamplight. I can't believe that happened, she said. I can. Lucien set down his papers. You're brilliant, Alara. You always have been. I was just too stupid to see it. You were raised to value the wrong things. Maybe, but I'm learning. He moved to sit beside her. When we get back, I want to start a proper medical program in Grey Hollow, a clinic with trained staff, funded by the estate. You and Mara would run it, set the standards, train others. That would cost a fortune. We have a fortune. We should use it for something meaningful. He paused. And I want to start similar programs across all Varick territories. Not charity, real healthcare, accessible to everyone. Alara felt tears pricking her eyes. You're serious. Completely. You've shown me what's possible. Now I want to help make it real. He took her hand. If you'll let me. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll let you. The summer passed in a blur of activity. The clinic in Grey Hollow opened in July, a proper building with examination rooms, a small surgery, space for teaching. Mara hired 2 assistants, both young women eager to learn. Alara split her time between training them, seeing patients, and working with the Royal College on their new guidelines. Aldrich grew from a tiny, fragile infant into a chubby, loud baby who demanded constant attention and gave everyone heart attacks with his adventurous nature. He was crawling by August, pulling himself up on furniture by September, and terrorizing the manor staff by October. He's going to be a handful, Petra said fondly, rescuing him from trying to eat a piece of charcoal he'd found near the fireplace. He gets it from his mother, Lucien said. His father, too, Alara countered. Look at that stubborn chin. They were sitting together more now, the 3 of them, 4, counting Petra, who'd become as much family as staff, having meals together, discussing the day, making plans for the future. It felt like an actual family. In November, the crisis came. A fever swept through the capital, virulent and deadly. Within days, dozens were sick, including members of the royal family. The royal physicians were overwhelmed, and the college sent an urgent request for help. Alara and Mara rode out immediately, bringing supplies and their best assistants. What they found was chaos. The palace physicians arguing over treatments, patients dying while they debated theory, resources being hoarded instead of distributed. "This is madness," Mara said, surveying the disaster. "Then let's bring some order." Alara turned to the senior physician. "With respect, sir, you need to triage. Separate the patients by severity, allocate resources accordingly. We don't take orders from, then people will keep dying while you maintain protocol." Her voice was sharp. "I've dealt with outbreaks before. I know what works. Either listen or explain to the king why you let his courtiers die out of pride." The physician's face flushed, but he stepped aside. Alara and Mara organized the chaos with ruthless efficiency. They set up treatment areas, established rotation schedules for the staff, implemented strict hygiene protocols. The assistants they'd brought trained the palace servants in basic care, multiplying the available hands. For 3 weeks, they worked 18-hour days. Alara barely slept, barely ate, driven by the knowledge that every minute counted. Lucien arrived in the second week, bringing more supplies and additional healers from Varic territories. He worked alongside them, never once pulling rank or expecting special treatment. "You didn't have to come," Alara told him one night. "Yes, I did." He was mixing medications, his hands steady despite exhaustion. "You're my wife. This is important to you. Where else would I be?" The fever eventually broke. Not everyone survived. Too many had been too sick when they'd arrived. But the death toll was far lower than it could have been. The king himself came to thank them. "Lady Whitcomb," he said, and he actually bowed to her. "You've saved lives I thought lost, including my own sister. The crown is in your debt." "I did what any healer would do, Your Majesty." "No." The king's voice was firm. "You did what needed doing. Protocol be damned. That takes courage most people don't have." He paused. "I understand you're working on standards for community health care?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good. You have the Crown's full support. Whatever resources you need, whatever authority required to implement these programs, consider it granted." He glanced at Lucien. "Your Duke has been advocating for this quite forcefully. Apparently his wife taught him the value of caring for all subjects, not just the titled ones." Lucien smiled slightly. "She taught me a great deal, Your Majesty." On the journey back to Varic Manor, Alara was quiet, processing everything that had happened. "You're thinking too hard," Lucien said, watching her. "I'm thinking about how different everything is now." She looked out the carriage window at the passing countryside. "A year ago, I was being cast out into the snow. Now, I'm setting healthcare policy for the kingdom. You're exceptional." "I'm lucky." She turned to him. "Lucky that I survived. Lucky that Petra and Mara helped me. Lucky that you eventually saw past your own stubbornness." "Luck had nothing to do with it." Lucien's voice was serious. "You fought for this. Every step. No one handed you anything. You're handing me quite a lot now. I'm supporting what you've already built. There's a difference." Aldrich chose that moment to wake up, immediately wailing his displeasure at being confined to the carriage. Alara picked him up, bouncing him gently. "Look at you," she murmured to him. "You have no idea how crazy your mother's life has become." The baby grabbed at her hair, babbling nonsense, perfectly content now that he was being held. "He will someday," Lucien said, "and he'll be proud." December brought an unexpected visitor. Duchess Margot arrived at the manor unannounced, her entourage in tow. Alara learned of it when Petra burst into the clinic, breathless. "She's here, and she's asking for you." Alara's stomach dropped. She hadn't spoken to Margot since the night in the shepherd's hut. Hadn't wanted to. "Tell her I'm busy." "I already did." She said she'll wait. Alara sighed, removing her apron. "Fine. Let's get this over with." She found Margot in the formal drawing room, looking every inch the imperious duchess. But something was different. The older woman looked tired, smaller somehow. "Lady Whitcomb," Margot said, standing. "Duchess Margot." Alara remained by the door, not quite trusting this encounter. "I came to apologize." Alara blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me." Margot's voice was stiff, uncomfortable. "I treated you abominably, threatened you, tried to take your child, nearly got you killed, and I—" She stopped, struggling with the words. "I was wrong." Alara moved further into the room, studying the other woman's face. What changed your mind? I watched you save the royal court, watched you work yourself nearly to death for people you'd never met, with no expectation of reward. Margot sat down heavily. And I realized I've spent my entire life valuing the wrong things. Titles over character, bloodlines over worth, control over care. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, it doesn't. Margot met her eyes. Nothing excuses it, but I'm asking, not as a duchess, but as an old woman who made terrible mistakes, if you might someday forgive me. Alara was quiet for a long moment, examining her own feelings. The anger was still there, the hurt from being threatened, from nearly losing her son. But holding on to it felt exhausting. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, she said honestly, but I'm willing to try. For Aldrich's sake, if nothing else. He should know his grandmother. Margot's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. They sat together awkwardly, two women who'd been enemies learning how to be something else. He's walking now, Alara said finally. Aldrich, or trying to. He falls down a lot. Could I? Margot hesitated. Could I see him? Yes, I think that would be good. Spring came again, bringing with it the anniversary of Alara's exile. 1 year since she'd been cast out. 1 year since everything had fallen apart and rebuilt itself into something stronger. She stood in the gardens of Varick Manor, the same gardens where she'd walked as an unwanted wife, and marveled at how different everything felt. The manor wasn't a prison anymore. It was a base of operations, a place she returned to between work, not a cage she was trapped in. The family, Lucienne, Aldrich, Petra, even grudgingly Margot, felt real now. Complicated and imperfect, but genuine. And her work was expanding faster than she'd dreamed. 5 clinics across Varick territories now, with plans for 10 more by year's end, training programs for community healers, new standards being adopted nationwide. She was making a difference that would outlast her. There you are. Lucian appeared, Aldrich toddling beside him, one tiny hand clutched in his father's much larger one. We've been looking everywhere. Aldrich spotted her and broke into a huge smile, letting go of Lucian and lurching forward on unsteady legs. Alara caught him before he face-planted, scooping him up and spinning him around. Hello, my brave boy, she said, kissing his chubby cheek. Ma, Aldrich said, one of his few clear words, and her heart melted like it did every time. Lucian came to stand beside them, and for a moment they were just a family in a garden, ordinary and perfect. I have something for you, Lucian said, pulling out an envelope. If this is another invitation to something, it's not. Open it. Inside was a deed. Alara read it twice, not quite believing. You're giving me the old Herrick cottage? And the land around it, 20 acres. Lucian looked almost nervous. I thought, you spent the best months of your life there, became who you really are. It should belong to you, properly. No allowance, no conditions, just yours. Alara stared at the paper, then at him. Why? Because you deserve something that's entirely your own. Because I want you to know you always have a choice. He paused. And because I love you, and I'm trying to prove I've learned what that means. The words hung in the air between them. They'd been living as partners, co-parents, allies. But love, real love, not the contractual arrangement they'd started with, that was something they'd carefully avoided naming. I love you too, Alara said quietly. I didn't want to, tried not to, honestly. But somewhere between the fighting and the working and the midnight feedings, it happened anyway. Lucian smiled, and it was genuine, unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. So what do we do about it? We keep going, Alara said. Keep building this weird, complicated life we've made. Keep trying to be better than we were yesterday. I can do that. Aldrich squirmed, wanting down, and they let him toddle off toward the flowers, both of them watching to make sure he didn't eat anything poisonous. He's going to be impossible when he's older, Alara said. Absolutely. He gets it from both of us. Lucian took her hand. But he'll also be kind, I think, and brave, and willing to fight for what matters. We'll make sure of it. They stood together, watching their son explore the world with fearless curiosity, and Alara felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness exactly. Life was too complicated for simple happiness. But contentment, purpose. The bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd been cast out into the storm a year ago, discarded and deemed worthless. Now she stood in that same place as a healer, a mother, a duchess, who'd redefined what the title could mean. The girl who'd left had believed her worth came from what others thought of her. The woman who'd returned knew her worth came from what she did, who she helped, what she built. That was the real transformation, not the title or the position or the recognition, just the certainty that she mattered, that her life had meaning beyond bloodlines and expectations, and no one, not Lucien, not Margot, not the family council or the entire kingdom, could ever take that away from her again. Aldrich stumbled back to her, clutching a slightly crushed flower, offering it with a proud grin. "Thank you," he said, his version of thank you, and Alara's heart swelled so much she thought it might burst. "You're welcome, my love," she said, accepting the flower like it was made of gold. Lucien wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. And together they watched the sun set over land that had once felt like exile but now felt like home. The storm had passed, the exile had ended, and in its place something better had grown. Something real, earned through pain and stubbornness, and the refusal to accept what others said she should be. She was Alara Whitcomb Varick, healer, mother, duchess, survivor. And she was only just beginning.